With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad.
So after last week when Casey List told me that I didn't sound good, and I assured him, no, I'm on a different mic and I sound excellent, and then I listened to my track from last week and was less than pleased, I have changed my setup in honor of Casey. So I hope I sound better.
Casey.
Yeah, I hope I sound better this week.
Well, you certainly sound better in my headphones right now.
Well, fantastic. The voices in my head sound great, too. Yeah, so we are up to episode 58 of Wheelbearings. And so we're recording this on a Friday night. It's been a little tough schedule-wise, so I'm sorry. But we'll get our act together a little bit more. But first, let's talk about...
I keep saying that, and eventually it might happen.
I mean... You know, every week has been a week, and over the last couple of weeks, I've been...
They usually are.
Yeah, I've been trying to pull together a shoot for some commercials I wrote, and I'm going into it a little loose. So it's been a learning experience, but now I know a lot about Navy uniforms, and I...
Probably way more than you ever wanted to.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I promise, this is my solemn pledge, to never, ever, ever, ever write anything that is a military scenario without having an advisor, like, from the get-go. Because it's very specific and it's hugely disrespectful when you're trying to speak to those, you know, people who had served and portray their world without actually being able to portray their world. It's like if you watch a movie and they're showing like how cars are engineered or something, right? And you just look at it and you're like, oh, that's nonsense.
I simply cannot watch stuff like that. Right.
I do the same thing when they show like pieces of movies about like recording studios and stuff. I'm like, I got the mic backwards, you know, like, yeah, it's been a learning curve, and I'm sorry I've been a little fried and out of it, but yeah. Every now and then though, it's good because I'll leave work and I'll put on the playlist, the Spotify playlist that I made. That have you listened to it? I keep adding to it. You should listen to it. I'm assuming the silence means yeah. Anyway. Well,
actually, the silence is because your voice dropped out for a moment there. I didn't hear that last statement. After Spotify playlist, the rest of it was blank, but I'll catch up on it later.
Okay. All right. I keep adding to it. I added some fun things. Anyway, let's talk about what we're driving, because we've got kind of a yin-yang thing going on with the cars this week.
You could say that.
You have been in the Trackhawk, and that's far more exciting, so let's talk about that first.
Yeah, so I spent a week with the Jeep Grand Cherokee Trackhawk, just, you know, as all that big snowfall we got that mostly grounded the Julia Quadrifoglio I had, and then the Trackhawk showed up, and man, is that thing bonkers.
Was it everything you hoped it would be?
I'm not sure what I hoped it to be. I mean, I knew it was going to be stupid fast. And loud and but I'm very conflicted. You know, I started writing up a review of this thing, and I started thinking back to, you know, when I first got into cars, you know, when I was in the late 70s, you know, when I was about 10, 11 years old. And one of the first car magazines I ever picked up was a copy of Road and Track. and it had they had a review of the Ferrari 308 GTS.
Oh,
And it was on the cover, and I went back and double checked the specs, and this thing has like 240 horsepower or something, from its 3-liter V8, in 1978, which at that time that was a lot of power, and it got from 0 to 60 in a screaming 7 seconds or so.
right.
And at that time, this was at the height of the malaise era. That was pretty impressive performance.
Yeah.
This Jeep, with its 4-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and it weighs about probably 2.5 times as much as that Ferrari did. And it gets from 0 to 60 in about half that time.
Yeah. Well, but to be fair, its supercharger probably takes as much horsepower to turn and probably displaces more.
Yeah, but even after that, even when you subtract that off, you're still getting a net 707 horsepower from this supercharged Hemi V8, and 645 foot-pounds of torque. And this Jeep, weighs 5,500 pounds. It's just nuts that this thing even exists. And the thing is, this is far from the only really high performance SUV. And again, thinking back, over my time with cars, it was kind of like in the early 90s, was one of the first sort of semi high performance SUVs. And that was when the GMC Cyclone and then the Typhoon came out. That had a turbocharged 4.3-liter V6. Well, and you remember how fast that everybody thought that thing was?
And it was. It was quick as a bastard. It was fat, just bonkers for the time.
It was great in a straight line, but it had terrible brakes.
Yeah.
It didn't handle, at all. Couldn't go around corners very well. Couldn't stop.
It was also
it could accelerate really fast.
It was very short. The Blazer, because it was the S10, so that didn't help it in handling. And I mean, I'm surprised that ever got built. And the Cyclone, I think I remember with your Ferrari comparison. I remember when the Cyclone came out in like 91. It was on the cover of Car and Driver. I think they did a Ferrari comparison with it. I think it was the 348, which was sort of the spiritual successor of the 308. But so yes, like the 308 gets its doors blown off like by a Camry today, but there's nothing on the road that is as exotic as that Ferrari was. Now I guess that's not true, but I don't know.
Well, no, I think if you look at it, in the context of its time, it was very exotic, and there were probably a lot fewer of them made than the high volume Ferraris today. Ferrari makes more vehicles today than they ever did. But the amazing thing is, you look at this Jeep, and you look at it, and until you get up close, and you look at the hood and you see the vents in the hood, and aside from the big wheels, it doesn't actually look particularly crazy. It doesn't look that radical. It's riding on 20-inch wheels, but a lot of Grand Cherokees ride on 20-inch wheels.
All the limiteds, limited on up, like the limited, the Overland.
It doesn't look that different from any other run-of-the-mill Grand Cherokee until you open the hood and you see this enormous supercharger sitting on top of this Hemi V8.
It's so good, and it's orange.
And you get in and you fire it up, and you hear that sound.
Oh.
The thing I love about, the thing I'm really going to miss, as we get to all electric cars, is there's something visceral about the sound of a big V8 engine. And I've heard Ferrari V8 engines, high revving, high performance flat plane crank V8s, and I love those too. But there's something altogether different about a big American V8, and this thing really has it. And then you layer the sound of the supercharger, the whine of the supercharger on top of that, and then you realize that this thing has 6-piston Brembo calipers on the front, 4-piston calipers on the rear. It's got big high performance tires. It can actually go around corners, and it can tow 7,200 pounds. And it's like,
I like that one the best. That's just absurd.
What is this? I mean, it's insane. How can this thing exist? And it's, it's amazing. And
you can remote start it.
I remember driving the Cyclone back in the day. When it first came out, I was still working at GM. It was my first job out of college, and I was working at the Milford Proving Grounds. and somebody from GMC brought one over to our garage, and I got to take it for a little drive. And it was really crazy fast in a straight line, but like I said, the brakes were terrible. And it had horrible ride quality. Over any kind of bumpy roads, the thing would just bounce all over the place with the leaf spring rear suspension and the really stiffly sprung front coil, double wishbone fronts. The Jeep, in spite of, having all that weight, riding on these big heavy wheels, is actually, right now here in Michigan, our roads are just in an atrocious condition, coming out of a pretty brutal winter. We've got these massive potholes, and, it actually was pretty comfortable to drive. It wasn't terrible at all, because it's got that, fully independent suspension, same as what's on the Durango that we talked about a few weeks ago. So it's a remarkably livable vehicle.
Does it have the air suspension as well in the track?
No air suspension. The one I was driving was on, Pirelli Scorpion Verde, all season tires. And then the optional tires, a P0, which is a summer tire, but for the winter they put the Scorpions on there. And it's a 295 45 20 tire.
It's such a big tire.
And I did a couple of acceleration runs. They've got the performance pages mode in the instrument cluster, so you can record your acceleration and braking and stuff. And on cold, wet pavement on those Scorpion Verdes, it went from 0 to 60 in about 3.8 seconds.
That's bonkers.
Yeah. That the only thing you don't want to think about with this thing is the fuel economy.
So what were you getting? About good 8, 9?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Overall for the week, I think I averaged about 11.
I will say that I'm so glad that the Hellcat engine exists, and it's so hard to keep your foot out of it because it sounds so good. I don't even care about, I would just let it wind up in first and second gear when I had the Hellcat Charger, because it just sounded so good. I didn't care about using all the power because it's kind of terrifying. It's so much power. You have to be pretty careful with it. Yeah,
well, and that's the thing with the Jeep, because it's the only Hellcat vehicle that actually has all-wheel drive. So it's in spite of being heavier than the Challengers and Chargers, it's actually the quickest because it can actually put the power to the ground better than the others, and so it's actually usable, and it won't spin around on a dime like the others will.
Yeah, no, it'll fling itself off the road because it's got that high center of gravity. These are going to get crashed. There's going to be just a certain proportion of them that just gets wrecked, and apparently there's a bunch that get stolen and stripped too. So, I mean,
that wouldn't surprise me.
You've done something right when your car is a high theft vehicle. It's that desirable.
And it's also not inexpensive. The one I had, I think base price is about $88,000. The one I had with just a couple options on it was $91,000.
That's
the most expensive Jeep I've ever driven.
Sure, but
by a long shot.
I don't really think there's anything that competes with it. Well, no, that's not true. I guess there's the AMG G classes.
Cayenne GTS, maybe an AMG GLE 40 or 63, something like that, or the BMW X5M.
It's interesting that the GLE is that's like the Mercedes take on the same ingredients.
Yeah. I mean, the GLE has this, it's got its roots back from one of the last Daimler Chrysler projects before they split, just as the Durango and Grand Cherokee do. So it's the same basic platform.
Yeah, I think even the rear lower control arms are very, very, if not the same, they're so similar that that's the tell. I look and I try to figure out because sometimes you can't tell which Mercedes you're behind because they all look very much the same, and they've played around with the badging so much. I don't know what I'm looking at sometimes. Yeah. So you look at the rear control arms and you go, oh, okay. That's the...
So just look, just check the BMW site. The X5M currently starts at $101,700.
Yeah. And the Trackhawk smokes it.
Yeah. This is 10 grand cheaper.
Right.
And it's absolutely faster. I think it's the fastest internal combustion SUV you can get right now.
I think though, being fast, that's certainly the Trackhawk's claim to fame, but it's just a good luxury SUV at that point too, right?
Oh yeah, it's really nice. It's really well appointed inside. Nice leather and Alcantara trim, and it's got all the features you want. And like I said, it's a surprisingly livable vehicle for something with an engine called a Hellcat.
How can you not adore that? How can you not just be like, that's perfect?
I'm torn. It's like as an enthusiast, I love the fact that it exists, but as someone who tries to be reasonably rational from time to time, it's like, why does this exist? It's insane.
Well, what would you prefer it to be?
I don't know.
I honestly, I think that it probably wasn't that expensive for them to do.
Oh, no, I'm sure it was not at all. I mean, once you've engineered the engine, for the Challenger, it's no big deal to drop it in a few other platforms. And, they already had the Grand Cherokee SRT anyway. So, they already had a lot of beefed up parts. Most of the things like the brakes and everything are off the shelf parts that you're going to get from your various suppliers. 6-piston Brembos are no big deal. Everybody's got those these days. So it's nothing wrong. People, if people are going to buy it, somebody's going to build it.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. I'm glad that it exists, even if I'm never going to be able to purchase one. And I guess that's not true. I do wonder what these are going to look like on the used market too. But yeah, it's just it's an amazing time. And I had this reaction to the CTS-V as well. Not this generation, but the last generation. The fact that you have a vehicle with such elevated performance, you still, like on a cold day, you can just hit the button a couple times and remote start it in your driveway.
Yeah,
like something that powerful. The old 426 Street Hemi was not like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was completely unusable in anything but ideal conditions. I mean, half the time, those old engines, you'd get vapor lock in the summertime, they'd flood in the wintertime. They certainly couldn't corner or brake. They were basically completely useless except on a drag strip, which reminds me of some other particularly fast cars that are available even today, but that's a whole other issue.
It seems like we've touched a nerve.
The Trackhawk is not quite as quick as a Model X, P100D, but even if it was 4.5 seconds 0 to 60, it wouldn't matter. I mean, it's still there's something about it that just appeals to the enthusiast in me. And yes, I acknowledge that it's stupid and it's killing the planet and all this other stuff, but
there's a lot.
Sometimes you just got to be irrational.
There's a lot of arguments you can jam into that whole killing the planet business.
Well, I know we're not killing the planet; we're just killing ourselves.
But not only that, like automotive
will
production
be here long after we're extinct. So
yeah,
I'm not worried about the planet. I'm
worried about us. Yeah,
habitable environment for us.
automotive production of any kind of propulsion system is going to have some kind of footprint.
No, that's absolutely true.
So, you're trading, you're making those trade-offs. It's a sort of like classical engineering problem to a certain degree. Like, where do we want the pollution? At what point do we put it into this, into the whole chain? And it's fascinating. That's a topic for another podcast.
What about you? What did you drive?
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of another topic, while you were burning up everybody's gas, I was conserving. I had the Hyundai Ioniq plug-in, which this is my first time with the plug-in Ioniq, which I did not get the chance to plug in. So I'm sorry, I failed. I don't have a garage, and I didn't want to be.
You have an extension cord.
You have
a plug in the outside of your house, right?
I do not have a functioning plug on the outside of the house for whatever reason. Every year it seems I have to replace the plug because for whatever reason it's a GFCI and it stops being able to be reset. So I'm gonna have to reseal the box a little better. I think water gets in there and then it just decides it won't reset. So once I replace the fixture, it's fine. So till the next time. But also it was like raining and wet and whatever. So I have a lot of excuses, but I did experience the Ioniq plugin, which is nice because it does all the things that the Ioniq Hybrid does, but it also has some storage. So you can use the pure electric mode when it makes the most sense. You can schedule its charging. I think it does all of the things that I think a modern PHEV or EV should. You can really smartly use the energy that it has, either gas engine or electric propulsion. So, the Ioniq is a really, really stiff competitor for the Prius. I don't know how it's selling, but it's a lot more compelling. At least I find it more compelling.
Well, it's not selling. It's interesting that the Ioniq is actually not selling as well as the Prius is, but its platform mate, the Kia Niro, is actually selling a lot better. They sell about 2.5 to 3 times as many Niros a month as they do Ioniqs. And the only difference between the two is the Niro has a sort of a tall wagon, sort of pseudo crossover body style, whereas the Ioniq, is this very Prius-like, 5-door fastback hatchback. And that's literally the only difference between those two vehicles. And it's clearly the American market has spoken, and they definitely prefer the Niro over the Ioniq.
Yeah, and that's okay. I mean, the Niro has a little bit more distinctive look, and I think it's actually a little bit more within the vanguard of the times right now, where everybody's a little nuts for crossovers. So it's just sort of the right shape at the right time, regardless of what's underneath it.
Yeah, in 2017, Kia sold 27,000 Niros, and Hyundai sold a little less than 11,000 Ioniq.
Wow, that's not that many though.
And they sold about let's see, that's the Sonata. Let's see. I'm looking at hybridcars.com. The Prius sold 65,000 last year.
Is that down from a bit? I think there was.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It peaked in 2016. It sold just shy of 100,000, and so it dropped by 33% last year.
Wow, that's no joke. I mean, what's going on with that? There's a story there.
Well, I mean, hybrids in general are down, but particularly the Prius, the current generation Prius, is not done especially well. Although sales of the Prius plug-in or the Prius Prime are up significantly over the previous generation, but still, it's not great. I
did like the Prius Prime. I actually liked it a lot. I preferred it to the regular Prius. They're kind of ugly, which doesn't help.
Yeah. Well, they sold, and I think that's one of the things that has hurt the Prius this generation is people are not particularly enamored of the design.
Yeah.
They sold 21,000 Prius Primes last year.
How many? 23?
21,000.
21?
Yeah.
So they've broken it out. Prius, like that's just the Prius. That's not the Prius Prime.
Yeah, the regular Prius, just the regular hybrid Prius was 65,600 last year, and then just shy of 21,000 Prius Primes.
So that's like 86,000 cars altogether. That's not off as much as it seems at first. That's not too bad.
Yeah, it's down, but it's not, so there's been a definite shift towards the Prime.
Well, and the price of fuel is also down. So when that spikes back up, I'm sure we'll see the numbers shift again. It sounds like the Prius still has a lock sort of on the hybrid sedan market in that sense. It's a recognizable brand now. They were one of the first, and then they very aggressively got their message out there, and it's a good car.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing that has hurt the Prius sales is now you've got the RAV4 hybrid. They sold 51,000 of those last year, so that took a lot of sales away from Prius. The Ford Fusion hybrid's actually also done pretty well. It did 57,000 last year, so it was the third best selling hybrid.
I thought that had just sort of like melted away into obscurity. That's interesting.
It actually the Fusion hybrid's been doing pretty well.
Huh. Must be somewhere else.
Kind of went away, but
yeah, I mean the C-Max they screwed that one up.
Yeah, it's had some issues.
Yeah, and it was expensive and just But the Ioniq, to get back to everybody who wants to know what it's like, I think the reason why I like it more than the Prius is that it's just more of a regular car. Yeah, I mean it has some of that shape that is aero, like the aero optimized shape, but inside it looks and feels like just about any other Hyundai. It's not like when you get into the Prius where it's got all this white trim. It's trying very hard to be very distinctive. That's not quite so much what the Ioniq is.
Yeah, I mean, the Ioniq is much more like driving an Elantra or Sonata.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing I noticed about the hybrid system is that it's sluggish to respond to input. Like you've got to make big inputs to get what you want out of it, unless you put it in sport mode, and then the sport mode it comes alive a little bit better. But there were times where I felt like it's just tuned to just sort of damp out sudden driver inputs too much. It felt a little unresponsive in situations where I wanted it to be a little bit more lively.
I mean that is absolutely the case. I mean, for for when you run it and drive, and this applies to most hybrids too. That they tend to be tuned, as you say, to damp out a lot of the inputs from the driver, and basically just smooth it out. So even if you can't drive efficiently, it'll do it for you.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to argue with a car that can run for 30 miles on the charge in electric mode. I was impressed with that kind of capacity because it doesn't give up anything in terms of cargo space either. Like I really like the packaging. I like it's roomy. It has good cargo space, and it's a hatchback, so I like that. Like it's hard to really find fault with it, other than it's it's trying to be as efficient as possible, which is its design mission.
Yeah, that's the whole point of it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, because I didn't get to plug it in, I missed out, I think, on some of the efficiency tests that I could have gotten out of it. And it was, it was cold here too. So that always dings it. So I doubt that I actually got up to the 50 something, I think it's low 50s, like 52 combined.
It's rated at 52 combined.
Yeah, I don't think I got near that. I mean, I didn't get bad fuel economy, but I don't think that I got into the 50s with it.
And you typically won't with any any vehicle when the weather's cold, you're going to get worse fuel economy, whether it's a conventional gas engine, a hybrid, or a battery electric. They always use more energy when it's cold. You have more rolling resistance from your tires. Your tire pressures tend to drop a little bit. That adds to your rolling resistance. The fluids are colder. Everything just you have more losses that are going to contribute to fuel economy. Plus, the other thing too is they reformulate the fuel for different times of the year.
Yeah. Oh, and we also have like E10 here or E15. So maybe not E15. Anyway, we've got ethanol in our gas always.
Yeah, we do here in Michigan too. I mean, most of the country does now.
It does not do wonders for your fuel economy. So that's the thing too. Like the EPA ratings are done with straight gas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're gonna get worse fuel economy with alcohol in there. It doesn't do as good. Maybe there's some scaling factor or something they apply to it. I don't know, but
yeah, I think they do compensate for that. That is one of the factors. If you actually go to the fueleconomy.gov website where they post all the official ratings, there's actually a link at the bottom of the page. If you scroll down to the bottom of fueleconomy.gov, you'll find a download link, and you can actually download the data file. It's got all the raw data for every vehicle, and so you can see the numbers that are on the window sticker. The official published numbers are adjusted, and that incorporates a bunch of factors. But the unadjusted numbers that you'll find in that spreadsheet are quite a bit higher. And they factor in things like using air conditioning. If the vehicle has auto stop start, that's a fact. That's something that doesn't really show up in the test cycles that they do, but they apply a credit to the adjusted number. So they'll give an extra couple of 2 or 3% to the final adjusted number if you've got that. If you've got certain types of more efficient air conditioning systems, they'll adjust for that. So there's all kinds of adjustment factors that get put in there, and part of that is adjusting for the fuels. So for E10, things like the mix of ethanol based fuels that are out there in the marketplace.
It's like they're trying to be accurate or something. Gosh.
Yeah, I know. Imagine that.
Crazy.
People always used to complain about how their numbers, the label numbers are so much higher. And, a lot of the time, real world numbers still come out lower than the label numbers. But if you think, where it is today is a lot better than where it was 10 years ago and a lot better than where it was 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah. I mean, looking back at some of the early 80s, early to mid 80s, like car ads where they've got the EPA estimates in little boxes in the ads, some of the numbers are just absurd. And you're like, what is that? Like downhill idling? It's just crazy. No way that thing gets 40 miles to the gallon. But this definitely gets into the 40s pretty easily, regardless of what you're doing. And the Ioniq has, typical Hyundai tech. It's got an 8-inch screen in it, or at least the one I did. It was the limited, and it had all the techie stuff. And Hyundai's been pretty aggressive about rolling out phone apps that link up with their cars. And I think that this particular segment of car is really ripe for that. It's almost like a more connected buyer or a more tech savvy buyer is going to be looking at this kind of car.
You mean apps for remotely managing the car?
Yeah, it's got like, and I didn't play with it, but it's
the Blue Link app.
Yeah, the Blue Link remote and just the different things you can do with it. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's like voice unlock and stuff like that too, right? Like, isn't that?
Yeah, they've got support for Alexa skills and things like that. So if you have an Amazon Echo, you can use that. You can download an Alexa skill for, and it's not just for the for the Ioniq, but it applies to pretty much all of Hyundai's current products. You can use that to do things like remote start your car, check the fuel levels, check the battery charge levels if you've got a plug-in. Just by talking to your little cylinder in your kitchen.
Yeah.
And I'm curious. What one of the the plug-in is obviously a little bit heavier than the standard Ioniq hybrid. You've driven the Ioniq hybrid, the regular hybrid, right?
Yes. Yep.
Did you notice any significant difference in the handling or ride quality with the plug-in?
I think it's been a while, so it's hard to sort of compare back to back. I will say that it felt buttoned down, and I didn't notice it like riding overly like a ponderous or anything like that. It felt fine. What in particular did you notice about the two that you're thinking of?
I haven't driven the Ioniq, the plug-in hybrid yet. I've only driven the battery version and the regular hybrid. So I was just curious, if you had any thoughts on it, because I think it's about 150 pounds heavier with the bigger battery.
See, and I think that probably helps it out, because some hybrids, they've taken enough weight out of them that it's not that they feel flimsy, but I'm remembering back to the last Honda Insight, which was a very bad hybrid.
Yeah.
But that car just felt chintzy, and they went a little too far, but you don't want it to skitter in the middle of a corner and that kind of thing. It's got low rolling resistance tires, so it's got no freaking traction. It's got weird weight.
It's about 300 pounds difference in weight.
Is it really 300? That's
yeah.
It felt good, other than just being overly damped, where I was like, come on, let's go. And I'm an impatient New Englander, so it gets a pass on that. And the overall, like once you boot it does fine. It's got an electric motor. It doesn't have a ton of like combined power. So I was coming from, I think I came out of the Mini Electric.
You got the Mini plug-in hybrid.
So that felt a lot more lively, and that may color some of my impressions. Because it's sort of two different ways of doing hybrids. Where this is a lot more efficiency focused. And I think the other thing I noticed was the regen brakes. There were a couple of times where I was like, we should stop now. But some of that's just training your foot and getting used to it. The fact that it drove like a regular car for a week was great. And I think we have really flogged this to death. So
yeah,
we should move on and talk about some things.
All right.
Yeah. So we have on the topic list, we're going to talk about another podcast.
Yes. After we recorded with Casey last week, I listened to the latest version of one of the other shows he does, the Accidental Tech Podcast, and Casey and John Syracusa and Marco Arment were talking about some car stuff, which inevitably gets them into some problems. Since they're not, as much as they may be car enthusiasts, they're not necessarily as well informed on those topics as they are on a lot of the other stuff that they talk about on that show. So I figured I would just address some of the stuff that they were discussing, specifically driver assist systems. And I'm not going to rehash what John said. We'll put a link in the show notes to that show, and you can go and listen to it yourself. But basically, I just want to give a little overview of what there is in driver assist systems today, in terms of what the sensors are and what the systems are capable of. And so the main assist systems that are becoming pretty common on vehicles today, you've got adaptive cruise control, lane keeping systems, and blind spot monitoring systems.
All of the stuff I shut off. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Carry on.
So adaptive cruise control is actually the oldest of these. It's been around the longest. It came out in the late 90s. And it it's a radar-based cruise control system, or in most cases, it's radar-based. There are a couple of exceptions, but generally, for adaptive cruise control, you have a radar sensor. In some cases, two radar sensors, a short-range and a long-range sensor. That when you set your cruise control in your car, just like traditional cruise control systems, you set it at whatever speed you want to go. But with older systems, it would just the system would hold your car at whatever speed you set, and somebody slows down in front of you, the system is going to keep going at that speed until you either go steer around them, slow down yourself, or crash into them. And what adaptive cruise control does is it use the radar sensor to monitor the distance and the closing speed to the car in front of you. And if the gap gets too small, then the system will automatically slow your car down. It'll apply the brakes, reduce the engine power, and slow you down so you maintain that gap to the vehicle in front of you. Very handy when you're driving in traffic. Makes it a lot easier. A lot less workload on you. To just basically follow along the person in front of you at a safe distance. Over the years, they've added some other functionality to that, things like automatic emergency braking. So now, if the person in front of you suddenly hits the brakes and slows down, or something comes out in front of you, it can, it'll also use the same systems, the same sensors to, hit your brakes as hard as it can, to slow you down to try and avoid a collision. The next one is lane keeping systems, which we've talked about before. Oh, before I leave that, the other option for adaptive cruise control, which is currently in the U.S. market, is only used by Subaru. Subaru has their eyesight system, and instead of a radar sensor, they actually use a stereo camera system, two cameras to give some depth perception, and they use that to manage the adaptive cruise control using the difference between what the cameras see to detect the distance and the closing speed to the car in front of you. And it actually works surprisingly well. I've tried it, and I was quite impressed with the performance of the system. It's not quite as good as a radar system, but it's also less expensive. That's the other alternative. Lane keeping systems also use cameras. And, so these are, some of them are just lane departure warning, and some of them are lane departure warning and prevention systems. And, they use the camera to detect the lane markings, as you're driving down the road. And sometimes they even can manage to actually see the lanes. And what it does is it looks for where you are in the lane. And if you start drifting out of the lane, it'll give you an alert. And sometimes even if you're not drifting out of the lane, it'll give you an alert. Which is one of the reasons why a lot of people, you and myself included, more often than not end up turning the systems off, because they tend to have a lot of false positives. But when they are working, the lane departure prevention systems will also, if it sees you drifting out of the lane, it'll use your electric power steering system to actually try to guide you back towards the middle of the lane. And the more advanced versions of the systems, like what we see now in some of the level 2 automation systems like Tesla Autopilot and Cadillac Super Cruise and BMW's Intelligent Drive, they actually try to do lane centering and actively keep you in the center of the lane, rather than just keep you from drifting out and, ping-ponging back and forth between the lane markers. They'll actually try to keep you centered in the lane. And, in the case of the Cadillac, actually allow you to drive hands-free. So
when you're in a car with those systems, do you ever feel like the damn thing's fighting you until you figure out what's going on? Because there's always this like notchiness as the car is trying to keep itself centered in the lane. I'm like, what the hell? And then I figure, it's got that little steering system thing on, and I shut it off.
Yeah, not so much that.
Maybe I get distracted and I wander around too much. I don't know.
I think that could be it. You're just not paying attention.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of texting to do on my commute.
I mean,
okay?
I have issues with a lot of the lane keeping systems. I mean, the biggest issue is that the lane detection just isn't very often is not very reliable.
Yeah, well, but I'll give them a pass too. Like, A, you can shut it off, and B, like what they're trying to do at a certain point, it's going to be invasive. So it's difficult to find that fine line about where it starts to make the correction and where I'm not annoyed by it. And
well, even for the systems that don't do the correction and try to keep you in the lane, even for the systems that are just warning systems, all of these systems have some sort of indicator either in the instrument cluster, or if they have a heads up display, often in the HUD as well. That when you turn the systems on, and typically they only work at speeds above about 35 to 40 miles an hour, so they don't work at low speeds anyway, which I've never really gotten a good explanation on why that is. But they typically don't work at low speeds. I think part of it is particularly for the prevention systems, because it takes more, at lower speeds, it takes more steering power to guide the vehicle. And but at any rate, they typically don't work at low speeds. So when you hit whatever the minimum speed threshold is, it's usually, like I say, somewhere around 35. Then you'll see the indicator. The lane marking, it'll show you lane marking indicators in the cluster or the HUD, that they'll either be hollow when you're below the minimum speed threshold or grayed out. And then they'll usually turn to a solid white, or in some cases a solid green when it's actively detecting the lane markings. And so often I find that these systems simply can't detect the lane markings, and they never go green, they never go white. So they're just, even when there's clear lane markings there, they often don't work. And most of the systems that are on the market today, in most vehicles, the biggest supplier of these systems today is a company called Mobileye, which was bought by Intel last year. And they were kind of the pioneer in this space. And their systems work okay, but I've found them to be very inconsistent in performance, and they simply, I would not rely on them. The Mobileye systems are all monovision, so that means they have one camera looking down the road, and they can easily get confused by lighting conditions depending on where the sun is hitting it. If you're driving straight into especially in the evening or early morning, and the sun is shining right into the camera, it can often blind it. Depending on where the sun is, what angle it's hitting the lane markings at, can have problems. If the lane markings are faded, it can have problems. I found that the stereo vision systems, like the Hitachi system on Subarus, or the AutoLeave system that's used by Mercedes-Benz, actually seem to be quite a bit more reliable at detecting the lane markings. And then there's actually detecting the lane markings, and then the sensitivity for when it's going to alert you as you're starting to drift out of the lanes. And they again, a lot of false positives, and some of these systems give you an audible alert and they start beeping when you start to drift out of the lanes. Others will vibrate the steering wheel. And I definitely prefer that because it's less intrusive. The beeping tends to be really annoying, especially if there's other people in the car. And then GM has a system where they will vibrate the seat. So they've got haptic feedback through the seat cushion, and so it'll actually vibrate on one side or the other depending which way you're drifting out of the lane. So you have different kinds of feedback, different sensitivity, and but basically just I've never been particularly impressed with any of the lane keeping systems, except for when you get into the level 2 systems, like I said, like Super Cruise.
Yeah, I think that probably squares with my experience. They just, if you're not paying enough attention to keeping your lane, you probably should not be there. Yeah, I don't know. I guess in that sort of like one or two cases, like where you drift a little bit and it does the beep, and usually I find that with the steering assist, like when you go to correct, it gives you too much, because it's already kicking in its own little bit.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems, with the assist, is a lot of times, it does overcorrect and you end up ping ponging,
right,
off back and forth up from one side of the lane to the other. If you just kind of let it do its thing instead of taking control again. And I found there's some systems that work better than others that do a better job, even if they're not officially lane centering. They actually do a better job of something close to lane centering. And I found Hyundais are actually among the best I've tried for that. They actually do a really good job of, tracking the lane, and not bouncing back and forth across the lane. And recent Hondas are also pretty good at that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think I was impressed with the Subaru system too. Just how maybe I'm confused too because it's been a while again, and I shut this stuff off. So it's like you say, some of it's actually a lot more gentle and just because when we get these cars, like that's one of the first things I do is play with that stuff and just see how it works. And I usually shut it off because it's unsatisfying and it's just it gets in the way of just driving. Anyway, I don't want to complain, so we'll keep moving.
And then the last and my favorite of these systems is blind spot monitors, which uses a pair of short range radar sensors that are mounted somewhere in the rear corners of the vehicle that look for vehicles in the blind spot. And typically, if you actually have your side mirrors set up properly, they don't actually give you a whole lot more information. You should be able to see what's in the blind spot anyway, but any extra little bit of information can help. But what I find them to actually be the most useful for is not so much the blind spot monitoring, but after these systems first started coming out, they started adding a second function to them, which is cross traffic alert, which when you're backing up out of a parking space in a parking lot, it uses those sensors to look down the aisle in either direction. And these days, because everybody wants to drive SUVs, it's a lot harder to see over the cars on either side of you when you're trying to back out to see if there's somebody coming down the lane or down the aisle. And so having that cross traffic alert, I find to be extremely helpful, just in case somebody's, coming along and, it gives me an alert, to stop before I back out, even before I can see that person coming. And so that's actually a really useful feature.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, anything where it's sort of like low speed maneuvering where there's obstacles, because you have a lot of things you're processing when you're, backing out of a driveway, even where I've almost flattened people walking down the sidewalk just because you look and then you move and then you look again and holy crap, there's a person there. They popped out from behind a shrubbery.
Where'd they come from?
Yeah. And then you feel like a jerk.
Tricycle come from?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not. Some of the systems, and they're not really ADAS, that like the rear view cameras. I don't have a problem with the rear view camera. What I don't want us to do is get lazy about learning how to use mirrors. But also the rear view cameras that put the display in the rear view mirror, the central mirror. I wish there was a way to move that around. I forget which car it was that had it. When I drove it, it put it right exactly like the LCD image from the rearview camera was exactly where I wanted to look in the rearview mirror. I was like, if I could just put it over on the right instead of the left, it'd be great.
There's a few different brands of vehicles that have done that. They're getting they mostly did that before we started getting the big central displays and the touch screens in almost everything. So on cars that didn't have big center high resolution displays in the center stack, they would use them, put the display in the mirror. But now that almost everything's got a touch screen in it, they're not doing that as much anymore.
Yeah, I mean it's nice because it puts it right there. It's I'm not opposed to it. It's just I feel like some of this stuff needs to be personalizable. That's a crappy word. Customizable to your particular ways.
Well, yeah. I mean, to your argument about when it is in the mirror, it's not like in most cases the whole mirror is not an LCD display, so it's the LCD is hidden behind the mirror surface, and only when it comes on can you see it. So it's not like you can move it around. If the entire mirror was also a display, then you could position it wherever you want.
Well, listen, it's friggin' 2018. We were supposed to have jetpacks and flying cars by now. I feel like they can give me a mirror where I can move the display around. The display that I don't even really want, but whatever.
The flying cars are coming any minute now.
That's what I hear, and I think it's nonsense.
Yeah. Well, I for one do not want flying human carrying drones, as air taxis in cities, because those things are just going to be way too damn loud. You've heard drones, haven't you?
Yeah, yes.
Rotorcraft are not quiet. They make noise.
Unless it's like the CIA black helicopters with the cloaking technology.
Yeah, but
and then
we're not going to have that.
Yeah.
And even those make some noise.
Yeah. I don't want to get into tinfoil hat stuff anyway. It's just yeah, I mean the flying car, like ever since I started writing about cars, that Terrafugia thing that's just always been like right on the cusp. And then they just got another investment. I was like,
didn't they get bought by a Chinese company?
Yeah, it's like a Chinese company must need to launder money or something. This is never gonna happen. Flying cars are not going to happen. And if they do,
ye of little faith.
I don't know.
I agree. I don't think they will happen. And even if the technology becomes reasonably practical, I don't really want it to happen.
Yeah, I don't like flying that much.
Let cars be cars and aircraft be aircraft. We don't need to have aircraft that drive or cars that fly.
I mean, but maybe it'd be easier if we had flying cars. You wouldn't have to take off like your belt and suspenders and shoes and whatever to go through the stupid security theater. You just like, I'm going to get in the flying car and I'm going to go to Omaha today. All right.
Yeah.
Whatever.
But it's hard enough to teach people how to drive.
Can you imagine what it's going to be like when it rains, or like when it's in that transitional period between rain and ice, when it starts to build up on the wingtips and the control surfaces? Like,
and then you're in Chicago and you run out of de-icing fluid.
Yeah. There's made for TV movies about this stuff.
Even real life. I mean, it happened a couple of weeks ago, during the big snowstorm in Chicago. At Midway Airport, Southwest Airlines ran out of de-icing fluid and had to cancel hard flights.
I mean, it's just like we're going to have a whole new compendium of like phrases like, oh, he went down harder than an L-1011 in 1985. Like just stuff like that. It's going to, anyway, moving on. I'm being too dark.
All right.
So we get the ADAS sort of lowdown.
Okay. And then Volvo.
Yeah.
Volvo's got a new engine.
Volvo engines are amazing. Right now.
They are. Their current generation of engines are awesome.
Yeah, I'm really, really impressed by them. And I love triples, which is surprising because it's not a thing that should be a thing. But 3-cylinder engines are really good and they have a lot of personality.
Modern 3-cylinders are great.
Yeah.
I remember the first 3-cylinder car I ever drove.
I know what it was.
Not great.
It was it Geo Metro?
It was, in fact, a Geo Metro.
Because you were a GM. And
better yet, it was a Geo Metro with a 3-speed automatic.
Oh, Christ. That was like, what did it shift with a bang? Like every shift was like a thump that made the dashboard shake? Because that's
the whole thing was just a little buzz bomb.
That's true.
At 60 miles an hour, 65 miles an hour, it was revving, I think, about 4,500 RPM.
Yeah, and you had your foot to the floor, so there were no pumping losses. It was very efficient.
Yeah,
they've come a real long way. And that was like the Mini Electric had that. Their 3-cylinder, their big. I think their 3-cylinder is big at 1.5 liters.
I mean that's about the upper limit of and. Really, I mean that's what most of the new 3-cylinders that are coming to market are at 1.5.
Yeah,
liters.
Volvo's is going to be 1.5 too, and so we should back up. Right, the story is the new XC40 they've just announced a 3-cylinder Drive E engine, so it's just basically a 3-cylinder version of the 2-liter 4, right?
Yeah, it's the 4-cylinder minus 1 cylinder and a reconfigured crankshaft.
And it's still turbocharged or turbo and supercharged, or is it just turbocharged?
I believe it's just turbocharged. I don't think that there's a twin charged version of it, but it has been designed to fit in with their twin engine plug-in hybrid architecture. So we'll see both 48-volt mild hybrid versions of this thing in the next couple of years, and also a full plug-in hybrid variant of it as well. So you'll have the engine, the 3-cylinder driving the front wheels, and an electric motor driving the rears.
I'm just finishing up my review of the Countryman E for Forbes. Volvo just made a Countryman E. That's exactly what it is.
Pretty much, yeah. The XC40, I think it's a little bit bigger than a Countryman, not too much.
It's the same kind of through the road hybrid configuration. Mm-hmm. And actually that's really good though, because that can be, it seems like simple, like a parlor trick, like, oh yeah, all you did was put an electric motor in the rear axle. It works really well. It's great. Yeah. It's good to drive.
Mechanically, it's a lot simpler than trying to do a power split hybrid like the Toyota system or the Ford system. So the transmission, is just a conventional automatic transmission. And then you put that motor on the back. The one downside to these through the road hybrids is because the electric motor is on the rear axle, you don't get as much regen capability, because when you're decelerating, you're getting weight transfer from the rear axle onto the fronts, and so there's less load on the rear wheels under braking, which means that you can't brake as hard. That's why all vehicles have smaller brakes on the rear axle, and so you're not going to be able to recapture as much energy from regen with this type of configuration as you would if the electric motor was on the front axle.
Yeah, but with regen, there's still energy you have to throw away, right? That you just can't put back into the battery that quickly anyway. So
it depends on the kind of battery that you have.
Oh, okay.
If you've got certain, it depends on the battery chemistry and how fast it can absorb or release power. And for example, when I had the Chevy Bolt last year, the Bolt, when you put it in low mode, when it's got max regen, it does a lot of regen, and it's not throwing that energy away. It's pumping it all back into the battery, and it has a pretty significant impact on the overall range of the car when you drive it in the max regen mode versus the normal mode. I mean, it's like 22, 23% extra range.
That's a lot. Wow.
And that's because you've got the motor on the front wheels. And this is one of the things, when a few years back when Tesla first started doing their dual motor all-wheel drive system, even though those cars got heavier, they actually were able to improve the range of the car for that very reason, because the regular Teslas are all rear-wheel drive, and when they added the front motor, they were able to do a lot more regenerative braking at the front axle than they could do at the rears, and they fed that energy back into the battery, and so that helped the range. Gave them, I think it boosted their range by about 10 or 15%.
Well, that and the magic, Elon Musk fairy dust makes Teslas, like, those are perpetual motion machines after all.
They're perpetual something.
The most impressive thing about the new XC40 with the triple is that it's going to come standard with a 6-speed manual. I don't know if that's true for the US market, but on the global
almost
newsroom,
certainly not. I'm guessing the chances of getting any XC40 with a manual transmission, regardless of engine, in the US market will be very slim.
Oh, but that would be so awesome. Like the hybrid with the manual. And at least if they're going to put an automatic in it, this is one of the problems with hybrids typically is, from a driving perspective, they're not pleasant because they have a CVT. That's, the CVT is designed well to work as that torque split device. They're going to put an 8-speed automatic, like a conventional automatic, in the XC40 as well. So it'll be pleasant to drive, and that's good. And that's, again, that's one of the things that's made easier by doing that through the road hybrid configuration. Yeah.
But, it's funny you mentioned that, not all hybrids, even if they're not through the road, even if they're parallel hybrids, some of them, a lot of them now have conventional automatic transmissions, like the Hyundai.
Right. That's one of the reasons I like the Hyundai system better than, say, the Toyota system, is that it has a more positive feel. It's not as like loosey goosey with with the gearing, and that's part just preference because they both obviously work, but yeah, so who else has a conventional transmission though? There's Hyundai, and then
Hyundai, most of the Germans, all the BMW and Mercedes-Benz hybrids and plug-in hybrids,
that's
all
right,
have conventional transmissions. A lot of in fact, I think all of the Volkswagen and Audi hybrid vehicles are that way. So actually, there's actually more of them that are configured that way than with a power split. Part of that is because people tend to prefer the driving experience with those configurations.
Yeah.
But there's also the fact that Toyota's got a whole bunch of patents on the power split hybrid setup.
Yeah, which I think started off as, wasn't that a TRW?
Yeah, it was originally invented by TRW. The first patents on that configuration were from like 1969 and 70, and engineers at TRW created it, but they couldn't really implement it because the technology at the time, you didn't have the electronic control systems, and so you couldn't really make it work very well. And so, nobody adopted it. It wasn't really until the mid to late 90s when you started getting the electronic control systems and a lot of the other pieces to actually make it work reasonably well.
But that first Corvan was pretty interesting, and it had a lot of features on it that, because I think it was a Corvan that had the TRW system in it, or I don't know.
I don't know if they ever actually put it in a vehicle or if they only bench tested it.
GM did some sort of. I think it was
GM
hybrid
had
Corvan.
a Corvair van. They had an electric one.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
And actually, the first ever fuel cell vehicle was a Corvair van.
Oh, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Either way,
the electro van.
It was very forward looking, and just to look back at that and be like, oh, these are ideas that are not new. They're just like we've got the technology now to actually pull it off. It's cool. So getting back to Volvo, the last 3-cylinder Volvo I experienced had a bad PRV. Yeah, what was that?
I said we are good at tangents.
We are. Well, I mean, it's a Friday. I mean, it's fine. It makes an entertaining show, I think. Is this going to be like a less expensive XC40, or they are like? I
would assume so. Yeah, I mean, I would assume this is going to be with just the 3-cylinder and no hybrid. This will be the base configuration. And actually, when they announced last summer that they're going to electrify all their vehicles from 2020 starting from 2019. So the base XC40 at some point in the next year and a half or so is going to be a 3-cylinder with a 48 volt mild hybrid system, and that'll let's see, the gas 3-cylinder is rated 190 horsepower, and they're calling that T4, so that's turbocharged. So that'll probably be the base setup in this vehicle, and then the plug-in hybrid and then the full battery electric versions will be optional.
Yeah, I have no doubt that it's going to look great because Volvo's new styling. I mean, we've already seen it, but it's going to look great. It's going to drive great, and it's going to be pretty efficient. So
the one I'm looking forward to driving is the new V60.
Yeah,
the pictures of that came out this week. Oh, that looks so good.
Yeah, Volvo is they're doing all right. Yeah. Although I kind of threw a nutty on Twitter earlier this week about Census. Yeah.
Okay.
We're getting along now more than we were. All right, let's see. That's just about everything on the list except for the goings on at Ford, which we can touch on just very briefly because that's still sort of unfolding.
Yeah, so late Wednesday, we're recording this on Friday night. So 2 days ago, right at the end of the day, Ford sent out a press release announcing that Raj Nair, their who became president of Ford North America, last June after Jim Hackett took over, and he left the company with immediate effect. Apparently, he had been under investigation internally at Ford for several weeks, and was found to be in violation of the company's code of conduct for inappropriate behavior, and he's now gone. And the following day, they announced that Kumar Golhatra will be taking over that position as president of the Americas for Ford, and moving over from running Lincoln and being chief marketing officer. And I think Kumar will do a good job. I think he's done a really good job over the last several years as a steward for the Lincoln brand, and really helping to revive that brand and kind of getting them back on track. And getting a good strategy together for Lincoln, to be reasonably successful. And so I think he'll be good for the Ford brand as well going forward. But I don't think that Raj Nair will be the last person from an automaker to be leaving for this reason. Basically what it comes down to is, there have been a lot of rumblings for some time about his behavior towards other employees who are not men, and
being very delicate.
Yeah, well, I none of this has been officially announced by Ford. I've not personally witnessed any of this stuff. So I'm just saying what has been said. I don't want to accuse anybody, but the fact is he is no longer with Ford after almost 30 years there, and I think he won't be the last person. Maybe not from maybe from Ford. Certainly, I wouldn't be surprised to see some other people departing. Given all the other stuff that's been going on in other business areas over the last year or so. In the entertainment industry and media, and from other companies, there's a lot more focus on bad behavior by men towards women in business, and I'm glad to see that this kind of stuff is fun. That the attitudes towards that kind of behavior are finally changing, and that people are being held to account for a lot of really bad behavior. And, certainly the auto industry, like many industries, has been very male dominated for a very long time. And so, there have always been, instances of bad behavior, and now, that's fortunately, I think that's no longer, it's being tolerated a lot less than it used to be.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
I mean, and it is like, you've got to, especially like the automotive journalism industry. Yes, there's a lot of lechery that goes on, and it's one of the biggest turnoffs, and then just the whole idea of treating people that way, like any people, because it's not hard. Like just keep your hands off people.
And it's actually it's not just behavior of men towards women. It's also towards other men. I mean, there, as we've seen, cases like Kevin Spacey, with his behavior towards other men, and there's been, I just saw today, reports, Brendan Fraser. Who
I read that GQ article.
Career going on in the 1990s, and all of a sudden, about 10 years ago, he kind of disappeared for a long time, and now it's come out, it's because he had been assaulted by somebody, and so it's it's just bad behavior in general, so basically, the don't be an asshole. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean,
keep your hands to yourself.
Yeah. It's not hard. It just makes you kind of like, it's one of those things that I actually felt like I was limiting myself because I was so turned off by a lot of that behavior in a lot of different industries. Like it's part of the reason why I never went into music as a recording engineer. Because I just don't, I can't square like that kind of lifestyle and just treating other people poorly. Just also, around the edges of the film and TV industry, and not even around the edges, it's there. And I mean, advertising, it's like all of these things like that, just that dynamic is like ever present, and it's always gross. And so just please don't do that. Stop it. I'm glad that it's all coming out, and I'm glad that there's increased scrutiny on it. And I am curious to see what goes on at Ford now with the shift, because I just like what has been the plan for Lincoln that was executed, because I still feel like from the outside looking in, I'm not sure that it fully makes sense to me, or that I'm seeing it. Maybe it's been sort of quietly rebuilding the brand.
Yeah. So what it's been about is really focusing as much as anything on the customer experience. So what they've done is they've tried to to differentiate their vehicles a little more from Ford vehicles than they have been in the past. And clearly, Lincoln is not going to get any dedicated platforms, the way, for example, Cadillac has or Lexus has. So they're not going to get unique platforms. I mean, there's not enough volume there to justify that kind of investment, especially on the car side these days. So what they have done is they've taken the platforms that they have, which are obviously shared with Ford, but they've actually done a really good job of setting them apart from their Ford siblings. So starting from when they launched the current generation MKZ, back in 2012, they gave it a really distinct look from the Fusion. It doesn't look like a Fusion anymore, and with over the last couple of years, with the Continental and now the Navigator especially, they've really done a great job on the interiors to really make the interiors of these vehicles distinguished from Ford. I'm driving a Navigator right now this week, and looking around in this thing, comparing it to the Expedition, there doesn't appear, there's not a single part that I can see or touch that is shared with Ford. It does not look like just a gussied up Expedition. I mean, every piece is unique, even down to like the turn signal stocks and the switchgear. It has been specifically designed and engineered for this vehicle, and would not go into an Expedition. So the experience of driving this thing is distinctly different from driving a Ford, and I think that's a good thing. And then they've done stuff with the customer experience, the dealerships, the Black Label program, the concierge stuff they're doing to really make it a better experience. So you're spending more money for this vehicle, and you're getting a nicer experience when you're driving, and you're getting a nicer ownership experience and buying experience. So I think and it seems to be working. Their sales have been growing steadily for the last couple of years, and they're making good progress.
So it really is basically, hey, let's pay attention to what Lexus is doing in this space and do more of that kind of thing. Yeah,
to a degree, yeah, that's absolutely true.
Good. Well, I mean, maybe all Fords can be that nice to own someday. Hey, go ahead.
We did have a question on Twitter.
I was going to say, I forgot a topic. The Waymo driverless ride sharing.
So Waymo got a license from the state of Arizona to run their autonomous ride hailing platform there. And
there's nothing in Arizona, so like there's not really much to
there's Phoenix.
That's not true.
They're doing it in Phoenix.
I'm being a smartass and throwing shade on the place. Yeah.
But you're right. It is a less challenging environment than San Francisco or Manhattan or Chicago.
So what are they hoping to? I mean, obviously they're hoping to refine their tech, but are they hoping to get the benefits of being in some place that's not such a difficult environment, so that they can incrementally get better at it before they they deploy in those places?
That's certainly part of it, and they want to figure out the ride hailing platform and figure out the the customer experience, the user experience in these vehicles, figure out what people are going to accept, what it's going to take to get people into these vehicles as opposed to driving their own vehicles. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be learned.
Yeah, well, and you actually just rode in one of these, so
yeah, it was back in October, the end of October, and it worked really well. I mean, that was on their test track. It wasn't in a city environment, so it was compared to where I rode in the Chevy Bolt that's being developed by Cruise, with GM. That was right in the heart of San Francisco. And, that was definitely, a much tougher environment. Or even, the BMWs that Aptiv was running in Las Vegas during CES, that was a much more challenging environment than what I experienced with the Waymo van. But I'm heading back out to Silicon Valley next month, and I'm hoping to get a ride in Silicon Valley, on the streets there with this vehicle to see what it's like in a more real world environment.
Well, good. Report back, and in the meantime, maybe we can figure out some regulation and legislation that keeps up with the technology, because that's really the next step.
Regulation?
Yeah.
In this day and age, no, we don't need any regulations.
Clearly,
regulations are bad for business.
You know what? Let's let the market decide.
Yeah, sure. What could possibly go wrong?
Right. All right.
Speaking of which, Ben Miller sent us a question on Twitter earlier this afternoon. He said he'd love to hear a discussion on the data that automakers are collecting from our vehicles and how they are using connected cars to do it. Are they selling this data? Is this a new revenue stream? Does this impact the consumer? And will the savings be passed on? So first of all, all the more and more cars now have built-in cellular data modems and telematics systems. I mean, it's now been a little over 20 years since GM launched OnStar, and within the next 2 to 3 years, this technology, this connected technology in cars is going to be pretty much universal in all new cars. Virtually 100% of new cars are going to have it within the next few years.
I think is this the end of the innocence though? Because they're not really collecting data right now, right? Or like
actually, no, they are.
They're collecting some, but they're not selling it, right? Like, or maybe they are too. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to happen. So, first of all, these are systems like OnStar and Hyundai's BlueLink and Ford's Sync Connect, or now they're rebranding it as Ford Pass Connect. All these systems have the ability to provide all kinds of services to customers. Being all the you mentioned the the remote app for the Ionic earlier.
Yeah.
To be able to do things like manage your battery charging, determine check the state of charge of your battery, or find charging stations and things like that, or precondition the car, warm it up while while it's still plugged in. All those things require connectivity, and so that's one of the reasons that's driving this. But for some time now, manufacturers have also been collecting telemetry data from vehicles, and certainly the best known of this is Tesla. They collect all kinds of data from the vehicles that their customers drive, including when a crash happens, and they'll tell you that no, your autopilot was not engaged at the during that last 10 seconds before you hit the that barrier, and so they are collecting a lot of telemetry data. But most automakers that have these systems in vehicles are collecting some degree of data. And I actually did a research report on this back in 2016, and I'll be updating it later this year on data services for cars. And I talked to a bunch of automakers, and the thing that I heard from pretty much everybody except for Tesla, who refused to answer the question, was I asked the question, who owns the data that comes off your car?
Yeah, and most of them say you do, right?
Yeah, they all said, the customer owns the data. and the automaker is just a steward of that data. But what happens is when you buy the car and you activate the service and you agree to use this service, part of that big long EULA that you didn't read, the end user license agreement that you didn't read, is that you're giving that automaker permission to use that data. And for the most part, it's pretty innocuous. They're doing things, like in order to provide you with vehicle health reports. Most of these systems, will send you a monthly email saying, hey, here's current status of, systems in your car, your oil, oil change interval, you're about 80% through your oil life, and you're going to need an oil change in about 3 or 4 weeks, things like that. So they're collecting a variety of data about what's going on inside your car. And part of that is, to provide these conveniences for you. But part of it is they're also using it to look at how customers are using the cars, and they feed that into their product development process. So they look at, especially for electrified vehicles, this is particularly important, to understand how customers are using their plug-in hybrid cars, and then it impacts some of the decisions they make going forward. It's like, okay, how big based on the way our customers are actually using the Chevy Volt, the first generation Chevy Volt, how big a battery should we put into the second generation Volt? Are they using 240 volt charging or 110 volt charging? 90% of them are only because because it's a plug-in hybrid and it can keep running even without a charge. 90% of our customers are never using 240 volt charging. They're just using 110. So given that, there's no reason to add DC fast charging to this car. So things like that. So it helps them, in their product planning for their next generation of vehicles. But going forward, and I think, what prompted this question from Ben was an article from Ars Technica that, was about some of the ways that companies, are hoping to sell some of this data. And, going back to that question I asked, all these different automakers, about who owns the data, they said, well, customer owns the data. We're stewards of that data. So, well, what about, sharing the data with third parties? And, what they all said was that, before we'll share data with third party providers, we get the customer to opt in. So we won't share the data unless the customer has specifically opted into that. So you have to give permission before they will do that.
So how does that work in the case of the coming police state? Well,
I'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But first of all, so one of the first ways that this is happening is with insurance companies. A lot of insurance companies today, will give you a discount if you agree to share information with them. And, typically, what they've been doing for the last several years is they'll give you this free little this little dongle that you plug into your OBD2 connector that collects data about the way you drive. And, then they'll give you a discount on your insurance for being a good driver, because they know more about your specific driving behavior and your style. And, so it can help them with their risk modeling. And so they'll give you a discount on your premiums. Well, now what they can do, because the cars have access to even more data than that little adapter you plug in, if they can get the data directly from the manufacturer, they can have an even better model, a better risk model. And so that's starting to happen as car makers are starting to share data with insurance companies. Again, the owner has to opt into that sharing of data. And if they agree to that, then they can get discounts on their insurance premiums.
Yeah, so the companies can charge more and pay out less. Awesome.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, if you really are a lower risk driver, then now the insurance companies can give you a discount. But what happens is, whether or not, regardless of whether you're a lower risk driver, if you decide that you don't want to share your information, now you're probably going to end up paying more. So you're being incentivized to share that information, and so you're going to get a bigger bifurcation between low risk drivers and high risk drivers. And so if you do tend to drive faster, drive more aggressively in the next few years, you're probably going to end up paying a lot more for your car insurance.
See, I feel like regardless of my driving style, that's just like an inherently discriminatory practice. I'm more concerned about privacy and security. And I'm not paranoid, but it's just, I don't
and that's
yeah.
That's a very legitimate concern. What happens to this data? Are the car makers protecting it well enough? And what's starting to happen now is there are several companies, because there's all kinds of ideas, that people are coming up with for different services that you could create based on the data that's generated by the cars. Whether it's providing discounts on various things based on your location, or your various other preferences that it might be able to gather about you. But so what we're starting to see is there's a few companies. There's companies like a company called Autonomo. Ericsson has a connected vehicles platform. IBM's Watson division has their own connected car platform, and all of these are data brokerage platforms. And so what they're doing is they're working with multiple car makers to aggregate the data from the vehicles that they build, and then doing a lot of analysis, big data analysis on that, and some machine learning stuff, and providing APIs to service providers that they can tap into to provide services to drivers. And hopefully there should be some benefit to that the car owners can glean from that in exchange for sharing their data. So now you've got more players in this spectrum, in this scene, besides just you and the manufacturer of your car. You've got the data brokerage platform, you've got these other providers, and so now there's more places for your data to potentially leak. There's more attack surfaces for hackers, to get your data. And then going further out, to autonomous vehicles, if we stop owning our own cars and we are driving around or riding around in autonomous mobility services, now you don't own that vehicle. The fleet owns that vehicle.
Right, and so the fleet owns the data.
That is the presumption. And this is something that, these are questions that have yet to be answered. And this is one of the things that I'm going to be looking at in the coming months is, and I've had these conversations with a number of different companies, and so far there's no real consensus yet on who owns that data. But to the question of, to Ben's question of, will the savings be passed on? Probably not.
Well, initially you'll be incentivized with the savings, but at a certain point, I feel like you're going to have to pay more to be left the hell alone. And it's not that I'm paranoid. I shut location and stuff off on my phone. I don't want to be bothered.
That's totally not a paranoid thing. I mean, AT&T, for example, does this. I think in with their internet service, with their Uverse, or rather, I think their fiber internet service that they offer in some locations. You can get you can get their max, their gigabit fiber service, and if you agree to get some ads fed into your browsing stream, you'll actually get a lower price. If you want none of their ads, or no, it's not that. It's for them to capture some of your data and and share that data with their partners, with their partner companies. You'll get a lower price. If you don't want them monitoring your data, your usage, then you have to pay a higher price.
See, it's not a perfect analog, but that's disgusting to me, because they are a public utility in all but sort of classification. It's certainly in the way that we rely on them and we use them, and we paid to build that.
I know.
They shouldn't be charging us for access to the thing that we paid to build. I understand it's the same thing as the FCC is supposed to, provide oversight of the airwaves which belong to the people, but it turns out that no, they sell them to the highest bidder and get in cahoots. I really sound like a conspiracy theorist, and I need to stop. But yeah, I don't, because at a certain point, like this stuff, they're going to know where you are. So the car is going to know that I'm driving past the Dunkin' Donuts, and it's going to know that I've stopped there before. And it's going to give me something on the instrument cluster or the HUD or whatever that says like, hey, get a discount on a coffee. Stop now. And that's going to annoy me to no end.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I understand I work in advertising, so I'm part of the problem.
You are the problem.
I like, really, is this necessary to, I don't know. I'm not coming up with anything but questions, so I'm just going to stop. But it is an interesting question.
But yeah, I mean, what Ben has raised here are very legitimate questions, and they're topics that are under significant discussion right now in the industry, trying to figure out how far can they go with this, how much revenue can they generate, and I mean, there is the potential to generate huge revenues from this. I mean, we're talking many tens of billions of dollars in potential revenue that can be generated off the data that's coming off of these vehicles. And, I mean, nobody's going to want to give that up, especially if we're in an environment where companies are selling fewer vehicles to consumers. They've got to make up for that somewhere. And the revenue that's generated off this data is one of the key things that they're looking at. So expect to have less privacy, and your data is going to be shared, and there's probably not a whole lot you can do about it unless you just buy an old car. Yep,
that's great. Maybe you could just wrap the antennas in tinfoil, or get some.
Just pry the shark fins off the roof,
Some lead sheet, it's just stuff like that'll work for a little while, and then the shenanigans will stop working when like the car won't function if it doesn't have a data connection.
Well, and that's a very realistic proposition.
Yep, and it's easy to fall into that sort of dystopian sort of worst case scenario. Maybe it'll be fine. Maybe it'll be great. It'll all get sorted out, and we'll all benefit from it in ways we have yet to imagine. So we can end on an optimistic note, I suppose.
Or on the other hand, in the words of Johnny Lieberman, we're doomed.
Yeah. I mean, hey, look, life is fatal, so we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think speaking of fatal, we've killed another podcast.
All right.
So thanks for listening. We'll try to pull the schedule ahead and make sure we're on the normal weekly schedule in the coming few weeks. Please let us know if there's anything you want us to cover. You can reach out to us on Twitter or the Facebook page, Wheelbearing Media on Facebook. We have an email as well.
There's a link on the site.
Okay, good, because I couldn't remember.
You just click on the link and then you can send us an email or drop us a question in Twitter at Wheelbearings Cast with all but the last A, all the vowels except the last A gone. And what else? Review us on iTunes or wherever you happen to be listening to us, and tell all your friends to subscribe to the show too.
So yeah, we'll see everybody next week.
All right, bye.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.